Hello, friends. We are back from break. So now we would discuss the nine core human rights treaties. So we are done with the concept of the Magna Carta of Human Rights, that is UDHR, and the International Bill of Human Rights. Now, what are the most important human rights treaties which are existing today? This is very important. Why? Because these are very important issues relating to human rights. Now, as such, the remaining two covenants of the International Bill of Human Rights are the first human rights treaties when it comes to the nine core human rights treaties. So we start with International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, then International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, then comes Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. This was very necessary. Why? Because ultimately there are different races present in the world, and these races have different cultures. So it was very important for us to understand that all the races have equal rights to live as human beings. And you cannot discriminate as such on the basis of a person being a part of a particular racial group. Similarly, the next convention is very important, and that is Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. This was very important to enter into a phase of modern jurisprudence wherein the punishment which you give should be proportional to the offense which you have committed. Now, this is very important. Say, for example, when it comes to theft, you cannot kill a person for theft, right? So, there has to be some proportion between the offense which has been committed and the punishment which you are giving to a person. Similarly, to torture a person because he has committed a crime is also something which needs to be seen. So, if you want to go ahead with theories of correction of human beings, that is, ultimately, a human being has a conscience and he can always get back to his better self. So, these corrective theories are possible only if you leave this habit of cruel, inhuman, or degrading punishment or treatment of people. So all these important issues put together resulted into a convention against torture and against the inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Then came a very important convention, and that is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Now, slowly and steadily, we started entering a modern age where women fought for their human rights as being equal to men. Say, for example, right of a woman to vote. Now, this seems to be a very normal thing to us. Why? Because we are living in a country where women have right to vote, and there is no question about it. And in fact, in near past, say uh, 20 years also, we have not heard of any case wherein somebody said that she is a woman, so she should not vote, or she is a woman, so she cannot become chief minister, and so on. So we are living in a very good system as such. We are living in very good times. But then there were times when women fought for their rights. So they fought for their right to vote, they fought for their right to work, they fought for many other rights. And to be able to develop a modern system and to come up with this assurance that you would not be discriminated against, this convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women came up. Now this convention is also basis of development of many rights at national level. Say for example, the right of a woman against sexual harassment at workplace. So you look at elimination of all forms of discrimination against women as the basis for reiterating on that particular right. Then there is Convention on Right of Persons with Disabilities. Now, people who are disabled have innate human rights with them. They are no different when it comes to being a human being. So you cannot discriminate with them on when it comes to work, when it comes to other areas. So to be able to clearly say that yes, the entire world, we are together when it comes to basic human rights of people with disability. This Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities came up. Then there is a convention for protection of all persons against enforced disappearance. This is a very significant convention and a very important reading for those who believe in human rights. Now, what exactly is this enforced disappearance? People do disappear. There are people who would simply leave their house or they would simply go somewhere. So it's not, you can say, extremely odd for people to disappear because of their own will. But then enforced disappearance is different. Enforced disappearance has much to do with the system. It has involvement of state in it. So there are certain areas, certain places in the world where there are certain political issues going on. So what you do is you make sure that the person simply disappears, vanishes in thin air, and doesn't ever get back to his people, his family. So, this vanishing of people in thin air, where the state has played a very important role, is what is called enforced disappearance. This is a very important treaty, especially for areas where there are political disturbances or there are otherwise disturbances. Now, then next is the Convention on the Rights of Child. Now, this is a very important convention. Why? Because children, as such, have certain rights. Just because they are children, that doesn't mean that they don't understand or things don't have impact on them. They also have certain rights. So, how you treat them. Say, for example, uh, since India is signatory to the Convention for Rights of Child, there's a very important debate which is going on in our country, and that relates to whether a person who is a child, who is not an adult, can be given death penalty. Now, since we never came up with a reservation to the articles relating to death penalty, we say that we cannot give death penalty to a person who is not an adult. So that is how you can end up having different debates because of being signatory to these conventions or not having reservations to a particular article of the convention. Then you have International Convention on the Protection of Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. Now, it is very important to understand that there are people who migrate from one place to another. Now, there could be various reasons why they are migrating. They could be migrating for work because they don't have work in the place where they live. They could be environmental migrants. They could be migrants because of the overall political scenario, which is not very conducive of right to life or a healthy life. Now, out of all these core human rights treaties, it is this recent convention relating to right of all migrant workers, which is still struggling with a very good international system of individual complaints. All other convention have very systematic individual complaint mechanism and other mechanism at international level. Now we get back to a very important issue, and that is human rights ethics. Now, what exactly are these human rights ethics? Now, ethics are as such, you can say, supreme norms relating to a particular thing. So, if human rights are there, there should be human rights ethics also. Then, what are these human rights ethics? And why exactly we wanted to come up with certain clear norms which would be termed as human rights ethics? This was considered as very important. Why? Because after two world wars, United Nations organization came up, and the experiences of the two wars or two world wars were devastating. The statesmen or the world leaders at that time knew that we need to come up with formal enumeration of certain things, or else we are heading towards next war, and we need to simply stop this if we want to develop as a human race. So the General Assembly of United Nations, it adopted the UDHR, that is the Magna Carta of Human Rights, in 1948. Then came the other covenants. Now, when we say that there are so many covenants or so many treaties, say we have nine very important treaties, but then there should be certain guiding principles to come up with these treaties. So, what is the core? The core is these five things. So, this core is called the human rights ethics. From this core, generate the rights or understanding of rights. Say, for example, example, the right against torture. It's universal in nature. It provides you with equality. Right against torture, if it is there for a person who is there in India, it is equally applicable to a person who is in Russia. It's equally applicable to a person who is in England. So these covenants, they are based on common understanding of these ethics. Now, first ethic to understand is universality. Now, how exactly this first ethic is important or relevant for us? So, see, the universality means that human rights apply everywhere to everyone, regardless of their country, culture, or status. So, wherever you are, whatever is your affiliation, you have these rights. So, as such, it is not a new concept, the universality. So, for thousands of years, the philosophers, the religious leaders, and others, they have believed in inherent dignity of human beings, which is existent. The only thing is they have been referring to it as natural rights. But everyone down the centuries has believed that there are certain specific rights which people deserve because of their inherent dignity. And as such, this understanding has not changed. So, whether you read Alpian, who said that everybody has rights, whether you are Roman or not, and these rights are common. So, this understanding of universality is also not very old. The only thing is, it has been formalized now because now we have UDHR with us and other instruments. Then the next thing is equality. Now, equality as such is a very important human right ethics, and it is foundation of all the human rights which we have. We simply cannot separate equality from the concept of rights. Now, if even if you read the UDHR preamble, the preamble itself begins with whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Now, there is one thing which is very clear. If the focus is equality, then we are very clear. that discrimination is unacceptable. You simply cannot favor a person on the grounds of the color of skin, the gender, the age, the language, religion, or any other status. And if you read the modern concept of human rights, then when it comes to equality, we also talk about people who could be having slightly different sexual orientation. You simply cannot discriminate. So that is the concept of equality. Then comes the concept of participation. Now, what is this participation? And where exactly do you want to participate? Now, the concept of participation is very simple. It is the ability to participate in the process and decisions that affect our well being. This is a very important and third human rights ethic. So, it would include everything, say, for example, political participation, public participation, or economic development, or participation as a society, which means social inclusion. So, it would mean many other things. And why we want to give so much importance to this particular issue of participation? Because we are more in favor of democratic governance. Democracy is what can protect human rights in the best possible manner. And democracy is possible only if people participate in different processes of their life. So when everyone participates, all the issues would be known and they would be addressed. And that is how you prevent injustice. So it is linked to where a lot of rights, right to assembly, right to information, and so on. All these rights have this particular human right ethic as their core. So I have a right to information, I have a right to assembly. Why? Because I can participate in the processes of my life or the processes which affect my life. Then you have a very important human right ethic, and that is called interdependence. Now, as I told you earlier, also when we were discussing the three generation of rights, all the human rights are interrelated. So you simply cannot pick and choose that I'll give this to my people, I'll not give this to my people. That can't be done. They are all necessary for us to live peacefully and to develop our innate qualities. Now you can take different examples. Say, for example, right to freedom from discrimination would also affect your right to education, your access to education, or your access to healthcare also. These are very important rights, specifically when it comes to COVID times. Then your right to education can end up affecting your right to take part in the government. So one thing would affect another. That is the reason why we say independence is very important now. And the governments simply cannot ignore any kind of violation, because you let go the infringement of a particular right, then it would affect many other rights. There would be a vicious circle. Then the final ethic, which is very important, is the rule of law. See, if you look at the entire system which is existent around us globally, the principle of governance holds governments, institutions, and people, whosoever is there in the governance, accountable when it comes to human rights. Whenever there is a violation of particular human rights, the one who has abused has to be held accountable. And this accountability has to be as per the international human rights standards. You cannot deviate from this. Now, this can happen when? When there is a rule of law in a particular country, if there is rule of law, then you can turn these universal rights into reality. Otherwise, these human rights would stay as dead letter of law. So it is the rule of law which would convert all these things into reality for us, individual human beings. Now, of course, equality, fairness, participation, transparency, everything is important when it comes to this entire process of lawmaking or law enforcement. But then it is the rule of law which is necessary and which brings international peace, security, economic development, everything which we need. Now we need to understand that without these laws, there would be no check on the human rights abuses. People would simply do anything and everything. So that is the reason why rule of law is very important. Now, these human rights ethics are also interdependent and they're knitted together. So, when you talk about one, you talk about another also. Say, for example, equality is possible if if it has support of rule of law, and so on.